Turn your living room into a joyful, hands-free playroom with CoComelon Sing and Play with JJ. Your child sings, moves, and learns right alongside JJ and friends, all on the big screen. It's designed thoughtfully to spark speech, rhythm, and coordination through songs and active play. Try an ad-free, safe, and interactive way to make screen time part of their learning and growth. Parents love how easy it is, voice-controlled and frustration-free. Kids love every moment of singing, laughing, and playing along. It's fun for them, and it's feel-good for you. Available now in the Volley app on your smart TV. Just search Volley in your TV's app store and start your free trial of CoComelon Sing and Play with JJ today. That's CoComelon Sing and Play with JJ. Available now in the Volley app on your smart TV. Search Volley and start your free trial today.
Volley. Welcome to Homeschooling Outside the Box, the podcast that encourages and equips moms to homeschool an outside-the-box child. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Cindy Renna, and today I have a wonderful guest to share with you lovely listeners. His name is Jim Weiss, and he is a storyteller extraordinaire, and he is going to share with us today why it's so important to tell stories and how wonderful oral stories can be. Jim, would you like to say hello?
Hi, Cindy, and hi, everybody at home. I'm glad to be sharing a moment with all of you.
Great. Well, Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself first? Because you have a very unique career and niche in the market, and you're this well-known voice that streams through all of our homes so often, but it's not something that you generally that you would see on a kindergartner's what do you want to be when you grow up sort of career. It's an amazing thing that you do. So how did you get started with recording stories? What was the path that led you to where you are today?
Well, I'll tell you, it's funny because when I did start to make this a profession, a career, we didn't know anybody who was a storyteller or who did readings of books or told stories, as I so often do, professionally. And none of our friends did either. This is back in 1989, which was before the whole explosion of spoken word recordings. And when we told our friends, oh, we're going to start making recordings for families of stories from classic literature and from history, they looked at us like we were crazy. And we were. But I had the example of a father who told us stories at bedtime and a mother who read to us. And her father, my maternal grandfather, told us stories that we got to know so well we would all chime in on certain stock phrases he would use. And I also had the example of my own father who at age 40 changed careers. During the Depression, when my grandfather, his father, died suddenly of a heart attack, my father had to take over the family business. He was 6 months from getting his medical degree at the University of Chicago. He was going to be a surgeon, and he had to give it up because the whole family depended on him. And he kept that career going well for years, till he was 40, and then said, I've had enough, and changed careers. Well, I was in sales and marketing, and I didn't like it. It got worse and worse for me. And necessity being the mother of invention, I thought, what can I do? And I came home and I said to my wife, well, nobody wants to hear their spouse say, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to completely change careers. And that day we founded our production company, which we came to call Great Hall Productions, like the Great Hall in a Castle. And I took a summer off and I recorded without scripts, found a studio that did spoken word, and I recorded 5 recordings back to back. And they were ready at Labor Day. And we started selling them. And the independent bookstores picked this up right away and told one another. And at the end, we put all our savings into those recordings, which there was a meager amount in those days. But at the end of 1 year, from the day when we had that first conversation about this is what we're going to do, we had made it all back and we were in the black. And 3 of the 5 recordings had all won major national awards, each for each different recording. And a month later, the other 2 original recordings won their awards. So we went on from there. And we kept making recordings and they kept winning awards till we stopped counting when we hit 100 awards. And the homeschool market, the homeschoolers found us a few years later. And that became the single largest component, not the only one, but by far the largest element of our audience. So homeschoolers get what we're doing. We're using stories to not only to entertain, but to teach and to reach people on a whole lot of levels. So now I've been doing this for going on 32 years. Randy ran the company and turned out to have this wonderful latent marketing machine. And now these are sold all over the world. I've performed around the world. And we licensed the company 3.5 years ago to Susan Weiss, a historian who wrote The Story of the World, who's a dear friend. And Susan has her own publishing company, so she now does all the marketing and sales. Her staff does. So Randy is semi-retired. She likes to say gently retired. I still do 2 or 3 recordings a year. And I perform when I feel like it, where I feel like it. And it's lovely.
That is such a cool story. And I just want to back up and let that sink into everybody. When did you say 89? 1989? Okay. There was no Audible. Like, this was not a thing that people were doing, you were so ahead of it all.
We invented it as we went, and we continue to do that. And we work together as a team. It's my writing or my improvising of the words, but Randy and I talk about what I'm going to record, and if there's a big business decision, we would talk about that together. And fortunately, we work well together, or there would be.
So you said improv. So do you write your scripts completely out, or do you just get in your mind the story you want to tell and then you tell it?
The first 12 or 15 of them I did with no script at all.
Wow.
I would come in maybe with notes listing the names of the characters and maybe half dozen main events. And it would just be like a phrase. Sometimes no notes at all. I remember among those first 5 was Arabian Nights. And I had 3 of the 4, I chose 3 of the 4 stories from among the most famous of the 1001 stories. But I decided that I wanted to include one that wouldn't be on everybody's list. So instead of doing Aladdin, which everyone knows, I chose another story called The Bird Who Speaks, The Singing Tree, and the Waters of Gold.
Yep.
And I read the story, and a week later I went into the studio and told it without a script.
Oh my goodness.
I sat down, took a sip of tea. In those days I was working with a professional studio and an engineer. At this point, you and I are talking. I've been doing my own recordings for 20 years now in my home studio, which is where I am now. But I took a sip of tea. I pointed to the engineer. He started recording. I closed my eyes. And 15 minutes later, I opened my eyes. And it was done in one take with almost no stumbles. And I opened my eyes, and the engineer was sitting there on the other side of the glass, literally with his jaw hanging open. And I said to him, Tim, don't expect this to happen every time. But I will still do some that way once in a while. But I eventually started writing scripts just so I'd have better control over how long the stories would be.
Yeah. Now Arabian Nights was probably, I want to say it might have been our first Jim Weiss audio or in the top 3. That was one of the very first ones that we heard. So if you're listening and you have not heard this, Man, you're going to really appreciate that took him one take because it's so good but it's so natural. It just sounds very organic. So that makes sense that's how it was recorded.
Those 5 original ones was Good Night. And those are visualizations to help children feel safe and relaxed and calm and go off to sleep. And I did that without a script too. And eventually did a second one called Sweet Dreams. And I recommend those two, particularly to people while they're self-quarantining, because they're calming. They take you on imagination journeys, and they help you sleep. And if your child is scared or nervous from all that's been going on, this will give him or her a sense of safety and calm. And I'm working on some new visualizations right now because I just want to get more out there. I don't think I'm even going to charge for these. I'm just going to do 1 or 2 new ones, and we'll put them up on Susan's and our website just so people can relax a little more. That's going to take me a few weeks to do, but I'll get it. So all of those things sort of began that way and then became this business. It's now Jim Weiss, LLC.
So these stories that you tell, you mentioned the one about Good Night. We've got that one, and that has been wonderful. I have a child who deals with anxiety, and a lot of listeners have children who struggle with anxiety. So that one we definitely recommend. It's such a good way for them to relax. But these stories matter so much, I believe. And I know just personally, we've enjoyed them so much, and the kids have learned so much. And I mean, your voice has been putting my children to sleep for going on, I don't know, I want to say 6 years. Your voice is every night in our home. But why do these stories matter so much? Why are they worth including in our homeschools? Why is it worth adding one more thing to our list? Because this is different than reading aloud in some ways. These stories are a little bit different, and I know emotionally, cognitively, historically, oral storytelling has made such a profound impact on people. Why do you think that is?
Well, with these particular stories especially, there are some special reasons, but I think in general, let me talk about story in general right now, particularly oral presentations. Over the last 15 or 20 years, the brain scientists, the researchers, have been studying what happens in your brain when you're dealing with a story. They've identified the parts of the brain that are actually turned on, so to speak, and absorb the story. And one of the things, there's some amazing things they've discovered. First of all, they've discovered, and there's a variety of studies that have proven this, that if I tell you information just as data and tell you to memorize it. I mean, my wife was one of those unfortunate people who went to a public school, and her introduction to history was a teacher handing her a sheet of paper with a column of names and a column of dates, telling her, this is history, memorize this. That's not history.
Right.
Okay. I learned from my father, I learned history through story, and I tell history through story. What they found is if you hear that same data in the context of a story, you are 20 times more likely to remember the information.
Wow.
And you remember it longer. So first of all, this is a phenomenally powerful teaching tool as far as information goes. Second, the stories are our stories that we have to know essentially to be literate. I mean, years ago, I was going to do a speech at a homeschool conference. And they wanted me to talk about why the Greek myths matter. I love the Greek myths. And I was thinking about how do I want to shape this? And I was driving one day about a couple of weeks before the conference, and I turned on the radio and the news came on. And in the course of 3 news stories in the next 10 minutes, 3 different reporters mentioned 3 different Greek myths.
Wow.
An Aegean stable, a Midas or golden touch, that sort of thing, a Herculean task. If you know the stories, you don't know what those people are referring to. And so many of our phrases come from these stories. Mm-hmm. And our sense of how people lived in different times and places. Which is why, as you know, on my website, jimweiss.com, I have lists of all the stories I've recorded. One list has them organized by suggested ages and talks about each recording, and there are samples to listen to. Another list lists them by historical era. So if you're studying a particular time, you can go to, let's say, the Renaissance or the ancient world or something, find the particular recording that deals with that, and it will even tell you the story that deals with that, if it's a collection of stories. And there's a third list where I went through all of the stories and listed them, grouped them according to which virtues or values they represented. And here's the other piece of it. I can just about guarantee that everybody who listens to you, Cindy, is doing that to a great degree because they want so much to teach their kids not just information, but how to be good people and how to function in the world. These stories, what's that? These stories, first of all, they're all teaching tales. The ones that I tell always have teaching inherent in them. I usually don't say the moral of the story is. I usually let one of the characters say it to another character, and I recommend that. It's not so corny, and people will remember it better if they're hearing the character saying it than if I say it in my narrator's voice. But there are also, and this is so important right now while we're all dealing with this pandemic, it's so important to have the examples of these past stories. Mm-hmm. During the 2016 president, when the country was already so bitterly divided, I was speaking at a conference, and I said to the conference people, on the fly, as I was about to go out and speak, the first of 4 sessions, I said, I'd like to throw away what I just had planned that you and I agreed on. Luckily, they knew me.
Yeah.
They said, "What do you want to do?" And they didn't go screaming from the room. I said, listen, I would like to tell the stories of 3 earlier presidential elections that were as bitter or more bitter than the one we're in right now. Mm. And I want to tell those stories and show what happened and how we got through those tough, divided times, because people don't know it. And it's so important to know it, first of all, so you can learn how people did it, and also sometimes how they failed by using some method that isn't as effective, but also they can feel safer. Wow, we got through this before, we can do it again. We're in the middle of a pandemic right now. This past year, one of my recordings was called Genius Times 4. And it holds the stories of Isaac Newton, Madame Marie Curie, Albert Einstein, and a lesser known but terrifically important scientist named Gertrude Elliot. And Newton was at Cambridge University when the plague struck England. And they shut down the university. And he went home. And he had time on his hands, sitting there in his family's farm. And he sat there one day in the garden and watched that apple fall from that tree. The tree is still there, by the way. And it's not that he had figured out there was such a thing as gravity. They already knew that. But it caused him to think about gravity. And that set off what has come to be known as his miraculous year, in which he explained gravity, proved mathematically the particular power of the Earth's gravity and the sun's gravity, invented the beginning of the science of optics, one thing after another, after another, after another, after another. And I like to know that. I like to know that it's possible in these terrible times, we're able to do something productive.
Right. And often it's the trigger to something productive that we wouldn't have had time for otherwise.
I've been doing this long enough that I've had people come up to me, young people, and say, Mr. Weiss, because of your recording Galileo and the Stargazers, I'm now a scientist. Wow. because of your recording Masters of the Renaissance, I'm a professional artist, or I said I could and I did. You know how you talked about the journalist Nellie Bly, or you talked about um, uh, Admiral Grace Hopper, who worked on the very first computers, and who came up, by the way, with the phrase debug the computer when a moth flew into the first computer and it shut down.
No way.
It was drawn in those boards the way we do. They had, tubes and wiring, and the heat and the light drew a moth in. It went in, and this giant computer, which is the size of your bedroom at home, shut down. And they searched for hours, and they finally found what was wrong. And they took the moth out and were able to restart the computer. The moth is now mounted and on display at the Smithsonian. But Grace, forever after, said when something was wrong with the computer, said, "Oh, we're going to have to debug it."
How funny. See,
And so,
little tidbits like that just make us more human. I feel like it's just good to know things like that.
yeah, but the thing is, this is why I do stories about lots of different kinds of careers and professions and kinds of people, because you never know which thing it is that's going to turn your child on, where they're going to say, "Wow, that sounds cool." Galileo read the story of Archimedes, the Greek scientist and mathematician, and that inspired him to become a scientist and mathematician. The year he died, Newton was born, and he read Galileo's biography, and he became a scientist and mathematician. And heaven knows, and Einstein was influenced by Newton. So it goes on, and you offer these stories to get your kids not only helping them to find what they love, but simply to show them how wonderful it is to find something you love and go after it. Even not what Newton and Einstein did, even if it's something totally different, if it's a thing you love, go for it.
Right. Oh, they are so inspirational. And these stories, I feel like, connect us. It's like we're all links in this chain, and there's going to be something that your child connects to in one of your recordings. You've recorded so many that we have tons of them, and we love the stories. But going back to the history point, we always, no matter what we're studying, we will always buy one of your audios that goes with that time period in history. And it gives the kids a peek into what the world was like at that time, and it connects them to another time period. But I feel like audios really open up the world to kids in many ways. And to share an example from my home, one of my children, who, before we started recording, listeners, you should know, Jim was so kind to spend about 10 minutes meeting a couple super fans who live in my home, who you got to meet before we started, has dyslexia. And so reading has always been incredibly challenging for him. He's almost 12, and it's still something he struggles with. But your audios and made a whole world accessible to him at a young age that would not have otherwise been accessible. So do you find, my listeners, probably there's a good chance they've got an outside the box kid, and that means they're either on the autism spectrum or have dyslexia or ADHD or some sort of challenge in that way. And I feel like that market of kids will sometimes pull away from books, but our goal is for them to love stories. And stories can be contained in books, but we also know there's, garbage can be contained in books, depending on who publishes it. So story is the real heart that we were wanting to develop that connection with. And so do you find that this is like a back road, like short, not shortcut necessarily, but another way for this audience?
We've heard from thousands of parents literally all over the world. My child is dyslexic. That is learning these stories, which she might not otherwise ever get to read because they're a little too sophisticated. Or my child is dyslexic and struggled, but became so inspired listening to the stories that he has or she has now begun to really read and is at grade level. We've heard from parents of autistic children, of ADHD kids, parents who say, my child cannot sit still. but will sit for 2 hours in front of the speakers and listen to you. There's something in the room of it, and the key, I'm convinced, is not only my delivery, but it's also that the stories, as I tell them, are always so character-driven.
Mm-hmm.
And that hooks us. You think about your favorite story, whether it's a book or a movie or whatever. The chances are you feel as if you're inside that main character looking out. You're so involved with this, and this is what hooks us. And so, yes, all of these extra challenges, because we all have our challenges learning, but all of these particular kinds of challenges we have found over and over have helped. And by the way, as you know, because you have the recordings, I always end up by saying, go to the library and get more books by this author, or more books about musicians, or whatever it may be. I'm not trying to take the place of the books. I'm trying to inspire kids to read the originals if they are able to do so.
Right.
Or have someone read them to them. They're both useful. I talked earlier about the brain research. The part of the brain that you use when you're hearing a story and filling in the visuals in your imagination is an entirely different part of your brain from the part that kicks in if you are seeing a visual on a movie screen or a computer screen or a TV screen. They're actually two entirely different learning centers in your brain. And they are each later in your life, they are each used in different kinds of creative thinking. So this is why it's important to have both listening skills and visual skills, auditory and visual, because you're going to need them both. And right now we're living in a very, very visual time. And it's important to develop the oral part of it, the audio part of it too. Not to mention the fact that at some point in your life, chances are very good that you're going to have to make a presentation in front of somebody, whether it's at a meeting or standing up at a town meeting or whatever it may be. And this is an example of how you do it. You get comfortable with the idea of speaking by hearing it over and over. So there's so many levels on which this is working. I once sat down and found like 20 different levels that happen simultaneously. Wow. So I choose to do it this way, but I'm not discouraging people from reading or getting the kids to read. I think that's fabulous.
Oh, absolutely. And I love that you mentioned that, because he does at the end of each one. And now check your local library for this title. So that's another point on the book, moving from your stories to the book, is that I feel like it's so helpful sometimes to have the plot points before you read something difficult. I know even for me, if I'm going to read something by Shakespeare, you sometimes get so lost in the language. There's so many things happening. There's so many processes happening when you sit down to read something complicated like Dickens or Shakespeare or Austen, that knowing the story ahead of time can take some pressure off of you, because you kind of know where the plot is headed. So then you can sort of bookmark that and just enjoy the characters and the dialogue and the language, and that sort of gives them a head start, because it is such an arduous process for some kids to get through the actual book. So it's good to know the story.
I think you picked the number one primo example with Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Shakespeare, for one thing, did not write his plays to be read.
Right.
He never wrote them down and published them that way. They were published after his death by his fellow actors and theater owners, who said, "Oh my goodness, Will is gone. We better if you were an actor working with Shakespeare, chances are he was directing you, first of all. Imagine that."
Wow.
The tradition is that when they first put on Hamlet, he played the ghost, Hamlet's father.
Wow.
He was an actor as well as co-owner of the theater and the greatest playwright. But if you were an actor, you only got the pages you were in, the scenes you were in. He didn't give you a full script, partly because he didn't have time. There were no photocopiers,
Sure.
So he didn't have time to do that. But also there were people who wanted to steal his scripts.
Mm.
So nobody got a complete script. They put the pieces together. The actors brought their scripts together after he died. That's why there's several different versions of some of those plays. They're not meant to be read, especially because the language is different. So it's vital that you either listen to a recording such as mine, where I tell the story and integrate in a lot of the dialogue when I'm telling it in modern language, or get one of the many books where the author retells some of those stories. And by the way, just one little tip to your listeners: if you like to read stories or tell stories to your kids, and I encourage you to do it, if you're comfortable doing it, you may decide, okay, this story I'm going to tell. This story I'd be better off reading. You may say, okay, I want to read this book to my daughter, but there's this one part I think is too intense or maybe too complicated. But I'd like her to know this story, but what do I do? Well, give yourself permission when you're reading that book, when you get to those 2 pages, to tell those 2 pages in your own words. You're not cheating the listener. You're giving the listener a chance to understand the story and absorb the story. It's okay. Later on, your daughter or son will go off and read the original and get that extra 2 pages.
Right. And that, I mean, going back to the point, the heart of it is the story. That's what is making the connections. That's what's really driving them to love what they're hearing. So that is good. And I know there's specific audios or stories that there's no way I could keep up. You know, I think of The Hobbit. I could not keep up with all those voices and characters or things that are real dialect heavy. And I heard you speak on a podcast once, I can't remember when, but you said when it came to dialect, if you're gonna sound insulting, or like if you're not gonna do it well, then just don't do it. Just read it, you know, in a normal way. But you get to something like Mark Twain. I mean, you're between a rock and a hard place, and if you can't do that dialect, it's better to let somebody else who can. But those are some great options, you know, to incorporate it with your reading and your normal read alouds.
Yeah, and you don't have to be Meryl Streep to do it. Plus, I don't know Meryl Streep personally, but I can almost promise you that at some point when her daughters were growing up, they turned to Meryl Streep and said, while she was sharing a story with them, "Oh, Mom, that's not the voice the character had the other night."
Yeah.
You've all gotten that one, right? Sooner or later, I Meryl Streep too. I almost promise you, it's happened to me. I know that, and you have 2 options at that moment. You can either say, "Well, in this chapter, she has a cold and she sounds different. Don't bother me," or you can say, "Really, what was different about it?" Because your son or your daughter will remember it, and they'll say, "Well, it was louder, it was higher, it was rougher." And you say, "Okay, I'll try and get a little more that way, but I'm not perfect. This is not going to be exact." And by the way, that's a teaching moment.
Yeah.
That is not perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's really good. We want so much to do the right thing for our kids, but perfection is a deadly foe because it puts too much pressure on you, and you give your child this impression that the only acceptable outcome for her or for him is to do something perfectly.
Right.
And it will lead to heart attacks or migraines.
Yeah.
Or a sense of failure at the very least. You don't want that. You want them to feel they want to do their best.
Right.
But there's a difference between their best and perfect. And I say that as a semi-perfectionist when I'm doing my recordings and I'm going back and editing and getting the sound quality right. But there's always a point where Randy and I say we could let this recording out right now and it would be terrific and everybody would like it, but we can make it better if I take a few more days. But eventually I reach a point where I say, okay, that's it.
Right.
Done.
It's got to be done at some point. And letting go of that perfection, that is such a great thing to model for the kids and give them freedom in that and say, look, this is duplicatable. You can do this also. And I know we've got a big age gap. And so a lot of times the big boys will tell stories to my daughter, who's quite a bit younger than them. And I know you played a hand in that because they're learning, like you said, they learn the presentation by listening to it. Right. But okay, we talked about a few different audios that you have recorded, but in terms of genres, I mean, you cover everything, right? I know there are stories out there from history and there's stuff from literature, and you've got a collection of poems. What am I missing? Am I missing any groups, legends? I know one of our favorites is the Celtic Treasures, and that tells about a whole people group.
We have American Tall Tales. We have 3 recordings of Greek mythology and a recording, one of my favorite history recordings that I've done, Courage and a Clear Mind, which is the historic stories of ancient Greece. And they are as thrilling and as adventurous as the Hercules or Theseus myths. They're amazing stories. I've told stories going all the way from ancient Egypt and the ancient Celts up through the end of the 20th century. And by the way, I mentioned Susan Weiss Bauer and The Story of the World, her superb 4-volume history written for families. And I recorded that, as you know, for Susan years ago. So you can read it or you can listen to it, or you can do both. But that list I mentioned, where I have my stories by chronology when they happen in history, I show which of the recordings go with volume 1 of Story of the World and volume 2, all 4 of them. So whichever one you are using, I think of that as the skeleton for your curriculum. You're studying the ancient world. The goal, ideally, is not to be studying the ancient Egyptians while you're studying 20th century Cubist art of Picasso and listening to Beethoven's music from the 18th.
Right.
Ideally, you want to tie them together, and when it's possible, based on the child's capacity at the time, tie in the literary classics that take place in that time frame too. So they're getting the history and the literature tied together. The Three Musketeers is one of the great adventure stories, but there's a lot of history in there too.
Yeah.
And Dumas set out to do for the French what Shakespeare had done with the English, where he wrote all his plays about the English kings and queens. Dumas wanted to do a lot of that. That was the birth of the Three Musketeers and their sequels. So tie the things together. Now, that doesn't mean you can't make an exception. If your child comes in one day and says, "Wow, I just read the coolest thing. There was this guy named Leonardo."
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to turn to your son and say, "I'm sorry, honey, it's going to be 2 years before we start." You're on a lot. The ideal thing to do is say, "You know what? We're studying the ancient world right now." And Leonardo studied the ancient world. He knew a lot about the art of the ancient world, among other things. I'll tell you what, I don't want to break into the flow of the ancient world. But next week, here's what we'll do. Give me a few days. Next week, every afternoon, we'll take 30 minutes and we'll learn about Leonardo.
Yeah.
And so you're saying good for you and good for you for studying this, but you're not breaking the entire logical flow of history doing it.
Right. That is exactly how our curriculum is lined up. And I use lots of great resources, but I've also written quite a bit of ours. Maybe one day I'll publish it, but I so badly wanted the timeline, God's timing, to be the backbone of our education. And so, right, I love what you're saying. If you can, then do it. If it doesn't line up, don't force it. But by all means, if you're studying the Renaissance, you should buy the Masters of the Renaissance audio and let them listen. And we've always done ours at bedtime. That's been a huge thing for us, is listening to audios at bedtime. And so we've listened to it in the car. Also, that's a great way to get it in. But what's that?
Captive audience.
Yes.
They end up listening and you end up listening. By the way, important tip, listeners. I love it if you play these recordings in the car. Do not drive to the visualization recordings, Good Night or Sweet Dreams, because you'll fall asleep. So those two, better safe for home. Any of the others, you and your whole family will enjoy.
Recommend. I love it. And try to do them when you're traveling for a while, because what we find is we always end up sitting in the driveway, with the car running, waiting to hear however the story ends, because a lot of your tracks, that's what's great too. You're making a shorter commitment because they are story based. So you can listen to, if it's a whole disc of the Arabian Nights, you could listen to one story and that might be 15 minutes or 7 minutes, and so you can listen to it in shorter chunks. And that has really been helpful for us to spread it out.
Even if it's one story, one of your sons mentioned to me that one of his favorites was the recording of Treasure Island, which is a great story, of course. And the story behind it is a great story, how it came to be written, but which I also put on that recording. But even that is broken into tracks, like chapters. So if you are listening to this in the car, you can get to the end of that chapter and you don't have to say, well, we still have 40 minutes to go. I don't want to stop it. There will be a logical place to stop it. And then you can get to another point.
Right. But it has added so much value and depth to our history study to be able to pull in the music and the art and different things. And so a lot of your recordings make that possible. And one thing I want to mention, we've talked about Arabian Nights a couple of times. That is one that I'm so thankful for you too, because I know if you just pick up a copy of Arabian Nights, not all of those stories are things that you...
I would say the majority of them probably.
Yeah. Let's say 80% you don't want to share with your children for various reasons. So
they're either violent or racist.
Yeah, exactly.
Many of them.
Right.
So yeah, I'm very aware of that. First in choosing my stories and in telling them, and I'll give you an example if I might, because you mentioned Mark Twain earlier.
Right.
Possibly our country's greatest author, certainly the funniest. When I recorded Tom Sawyer, there's a scene in which there's a murder in the graveyard, and Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn see it. They're hiding in the bushes. And I literally spent an entire day in the studio doing 40 takes of that 30 seconds where somebody is murdered. Because you couldn't take it out because the whole plot pivots on it. But I didn't want it to be scary or overly violent or specific in its violence. And it took me, I don't know how many takes to get it to the point where a child would understand it happened, but without any explicit detail. And then I made sure that the next scene immediately had humor in it. And I realized Mark Twain must have felt the same way, because the next scene in the book, he lightens up the tension. And I can see him sitting at his desk in Hartford saying, wait a minute, I just tightened the screws too much on these kids. I better lose up. I better get back to some laughs right away. Yeah. So he eased back into that. Well, that goes back to what I said earlier about if there's a section you think is too intense, tell it your own way. But yeah, I always do that when I'm looking at a recording. Is there some section here I'm going to have to finesse a little bit?
Right. And that's great, because then again, I mean, it makes those stories accessible to kids at an age or, of a sensitivity level that maybe they would have missed it if their only option was to read all the details of the book. And same with Shakespeare, because, he had quite a sense of humor in some ways. So, I mean, it's nice for you to take that and make it available in a way that they can appreciate and that moms can appreciate.
Nobody knows all this stuff. I mean, for me, part of the fun sometimes is doing research before I ever sit down and write it or record it. I only record stories I love, that I find interesting. If you try and tell a story you don't love, it'll fall flat. If you tell a story you love, chances are they'll pick up on your enthusiasm. Well, I love learning the stories and learning these details, and those behind the scene details like Newton, going home, viewing the apple, or all the stories of how the authors came to write their masterpieces. It brings it to life, and it's so interesting to me. And I feel my chances of interesting you are greatly increased if I'm telling the stories that I love myself.
Right. And that is such a great detail when you do give the background, because I know you do that on quite a few that we've heard, where you tell the backstory and give us a peek behind the scenes, and that just makes it more whole for the listener. But let's talk about how you choose what you record. You said that you only do what you record. So is there a method that you have, or do you just sort of, whatever strikes you, you think, oh, I'll have to do that next?
Well, it's a combination of things. I mentioned earlier that my wife Randy and I will talk about it before I record something. But so sometimes it's a story I've wanted to do for a long time. I just haven't gotten around to it. Sometimes we'll sit down and say, it's been a few years since I did a collection for much younger kids, or for older kids, or it's been a while since I did a swashbuckling adventure, or, we're trying to keep a balance. We're trying to be aware of stories. There are some stories that people tend, unfortunately, I think, people tend to think of as more girl or more boy. If you tell the stories right, that doesn't have to happen, by the way.
Right.
But I'm looking at things like that. I'm looking at maybe I haven't told something from the ancient world for a while. I have a list on my laptop of future titles, future projects. And sometimes one of those is suddenly boiled at the top for whatever reason. And I mentioned earlier that business about the election of 2016 and how I went out and told those stories of 3 earlier elections. I went back in my studio when I got home and I recorded those 3 stories. They're only available as downloads. I didn't put them onto a physical disc, but they're there. You can get them and listen to them. And the stories are phenomenal. And they're our history. Jefferson and Adams in 1800, Lincoln's election, and the oncoming pressure of the Civil War, the election of 1968 with riots in the streets, and Vietnam and the civil rights. And all of those things, those are our stories. Courage in a Clear Mind, the Greek story, has me a little shaky right now because I see I see a lot of parallels between where we are right now and the Athenians. And I'm hoping and praying we've got people who know enough about this that they're not going to mess up the same way. We're going to find a new inventive way to mess up, but that they're going to learn lessons and say, okay, wait a minute. They tried this 2,500 years ago and look what happened.
Right.
What can we use from them and what can we not use? Harry Truman said when he was president, his secret weapon was the stories of the great Greeks and Romans written 2,000 years ago by Plutarch. Plutarch's Lives of the Noble Greeks and Romans. He said he could always find somebody like the person he was trying to deal with or the situation he was trying to figure out in the pages of Plutarch. And Plutarch lived 2,000 years ago.
Right.
Truman said, this is how I knew what to do when I was otherwise stumped.
Wow. What's the quote? Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it.
That's right. And I'll give you the other quote that I wish were carved into the walls of Congress, both houses of Congress and every state legislature. This one comes from the English author G.K. Chesterton, 20th century. And he said something like, what I most dislike about an argument is it means it's the end of the discussion.
Oh, that's good.
We're doing a lot of shouting right now and not enough listening.
Right.
That's the other thing about a story. This is so vital. And if this were all that I could tell you about why you should share stories, this would be enough in my book. When you share a story you care about with somebody else, they know it. Mm-hmm. And a bond happens between you. People recognize you're trusting them with this thing that you care about, and they tend, overwhelmingly, with rare exceptions, they tend to respond accordingly without all the armor that we so often wear with one another. It gives us a chance to build this bond while simultaneously, through the characters in the story, we're learning what they learned. Mm-hmm. And I've said this a million times through the years, but it's worth repeating. Your child may not remember every detail of every story you read to her or tell to him. But what I can promise you is your child will remember that you shared the stories that you cared about and that you loved her or him enough to do that. And that will mean everything in your child's life. And if you are blessed, you will live long enough, as I have now, to watch your child starting to share their stories with her child. And you will know what you said earlier is so true. We're all part of the chain.
That was wonderful. I do have one quick favor to ask you. Now that I've got to pick your brain and find out so much about your backstory and where all these fantastic stories come from, I wonder if you would give a gift to all of us who some are still locked down in quarantine, some are, starting to come out, but probably a little stir crazy. I wonder if you could bless us with a short little reading, maybe a poem, and then everybody could get the idea of what one of your audios sounds like, because I know everybody's going to want to go purchase one as soon as we're done with this. And I will tell everybody how to do that after he's done reading. But would you share something with us?
Most of the recordings, I'm speaking in my own words. With the Shakespeare, I integrate some Shakespeare's verse, for example. But I also do 2 recordings in which I performed famous poems and talked about the poets and how they came to write these stories. Long John Silver, going back to Treasure Island, the idea for Long John Silver came to Robert Louis Stevenson because one of his friends had to have his leg amputated.
Wow.
And instead of letting it destroy him, the man became this wonderful literary figure who ended up publishing people like T.S. Eliot and William Butler Yeats, and inspired, with his strength and his humor, Robert Louis Stevenson to create Long John Silver. So these things happen. I'm going to read to you a poem from Lewis Carroll from Alice in Wonderland. And some of these words he made up. Some of them have now become part of our language. He made them up, and it's interesting. You can still figure out what the intent of the word is, even when it's nonsense. That's what's wonderful about this poem. So it's called Jabberwocky. And just listen. It takes a moment to get in, and then you'll really enjoy this, I think. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toes did gyre and gimble in the wave. All mimsy where the borough goes, and the mome rats outgrave. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the Jabjab bird, and shun the frumious Bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand. Long time the manxome foe he sought. Then rested he by the tum-tum tree, and stood a while in thought. And as in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock, with eyes of flame, came whiffling through the tulgey wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went galumphing back. Oh, hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. Oh, frabjous day, callooh, calais, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toes did gyre and gimble in the way. All mimsy where the borough goes, and the mome rats outrave.
Bravo. Oh, that has got to be one of our favorite poems. I'm so delighted that you chose that one. We are huge Lewis Carroll fans in this house, so I know my kids personally will be thrilled to hear that. So that is just a taste of what you can have, lovely listeners, if you go and get Jim Weiss's productions. They truly are productions. Readings, that does not do it justice. It really is a full production, and you really take us to another time and place when we listen to it. And there's something for everyone. Like you mentioned, I have a 6-year-old who loves you, and I have 13-year-olds who've been listening to you for years and years. Is there anything new coming? Can you give us a teaser, or is that not allowed?
I'll tell you about some new ones that have just come out recently. This past year, I think I mentioned Genius Times 4, the one that has the stories of Newton and Einstein and Madame Curie and so on. I was stunned to find out that Madame Curie, her husband, one of her daughters, and her son-in-law all won Nobel Prizes.
Wow.
They won 6 Nobels in
I had no idea.
2 generations, despite all sorts of terrible challenges.
Yeah.
But Genius Times 4, I also have read from the printed page, My Father's Dragon, which is a wonderful Newberyana book. And I also read separately The Reluctant Dragon by Kenneth Graham, who wrote Wind in the Willows, Mr. Toad. I have a recording, one of my history recordings I did a year ago. One of my favorite things. We talk about finding an open area in history that I hadn't done. And I said, we got to do something about the Middle Ages, the medieval era. So I put together a recording of amazing true stories called Swordsmen, Saints, and Scholars. It cover 900 or 1,000 years of the medieval era with adventurers, with saints, with scholars, in all across Europe and the Middle East and Northern Africa. And if you take that one, if you go from one of my ancient world recordings, and you, especially say the Julius Caesar recording, and then do this one, Swordsmen, Saints, and Scholars, that leads you in turn to Masters of the Renaissance. Mm-hmm. And that takes you all the way through the Renaissance, up to the modern world, basically. So all of these things flow, but I don't know what's going to come next. Other than, as I say, I would hope I can do some more visualizations that we'll put out online at least. After that, I'm not sure what comes next. We'll wait and see what bubbles to the surface, Cindy.
Right.
But maybe you'll give me a nice suggestion. That's happened before.
Yes, I know my kids would love to hear more Brothers Grimm. We just did The Nose Tree, and they love Brementown musicians, and it's so funny because you're just a name around the house. They're like, Jim Weiss should record this. Like,
I did. I've done Brementown musicians.
Oh, did you? I haven't seen that one. We'll have to get it.
It's on one of the collections of, there are, I think, 4 or 5 different recordings that have a lot of fairy tales on them, and that's on one of them.
Oh.
I think that one is on First Stories to Last a Lifetime, along with Goldilocks. And I wrote a poem version of The Little Red Hen.
Oh, fun.
With lots of fun, and even has some sound effects in it, and which I don't usually do because I find most of the time they're just distraction. But put there by producers who don't have much confidence in our listening ability.
Right. Well, we'll have to look that one up because they'll definitely want that. So what is the best way for us to purchase? Because I know usually everything is on disc still. Are you moving? I think I found one of yours on Audible, but what is the best way?
I think Audible is picking up more and more of them now. Right now, the first stop I would just suggest is you go to my own website, jimweiss.com, and click portals, because there you have all of the recordings grouped by age group, and of course there's that other list about when they happened, but grouped by age group. There's a sound bite for almost every one of them, so you can hear a little bit, and there'll be a description. Then when you decide that's the one you want, you click on more info about it, and it will give you a choice. You can click on Well-Trained Mind Press, which is Susan Weiss Bauer's website, and you can order them all there. Or it will give you the option of buying them through Amazon or through iTunes or through another distributor called CD Baby. And almost all of them are available both in CD format and as downloads. So you can choose. You see, which this is the one I want. This is the format I want. This is where I'll buy it. Audible is picking them up now. They're putting them where they're right now. They're in the process of putting them up. So some of them are there. Some of them will be soon.
Wonderful. So jimweiss.com is the best way to keep up with you?
I think so, because certainly with the recordings. Also, I have a Facebook page, Jim Weiss, and then in parentheses, official.
Yeah.
And just in case you wondered. And I write things there, not every single day, but I'll often put in a story about something that happened on that day in history. How Tchaikovsky came to New York to conduct the orchestra at the opening of Carnegie Hall. How all these different things. And I also mention there every time I have a new recording coming out.
Wonderful.
So another way you can know that that's going to happen. If you want to, there's a place at jimweiss.com where you can get onto our email mailing list. So when a new recording comes out, we will notify you. We don't bombard people at all. It's not spam, but we do let our email people know this is coming out and it'll be out on such and such a day.
Fantastic. Well, I will definitely put all of those links in the show notes. So if you're listening and you're driving, don't try to scribble anything down. Just head back later and click on the link, and we will get you set up with some Jim Weiss audios because you need them in your and your child's life. I promise you won't regret it. Jim, thank you so much for talking with us today and encouraging us and inspiring us.
It's really been a delight, Cindy. Thank you so much for asking me. And I love doing this, and I love speaking with you. It was great to meet some of your kids. And I will also say that if anybody has questions about any of this, there's a place on the website where you can email me, or you can put up the Great Hall at greathall.com email address if somebody has a question or an inquiry about a performance. And thank you so much, Cindy, for asking. I loved it.
Thank you. Take care. Thanks so much for listening to Homeschooling Outside the Box. If you are loving the show, please head over to iTunes and leave a review. This is a great way to help other moms just like you find encouragement in their homeschool with their outside-the-box child as well. For more encouragement, be sure to head to cindyrenna.com and you can check out some great blog posts as well as a shop that will help equip you on your homeschooling journey.